What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video, I'm going to be showcasing my favorite Prismatic Titan build. I used this build through the entire Legendary campaign, and it performed wonderfully. I also did a preview video for this build, but now that I have some experience with it, and we have access to the whole suite of Prismatic by being able to unlock all the fragments, I want to make a new video showcasing this at its true power. The beauty of it too is it's customizable to whatever you prefer. So I will not only talk about what I used, but also strong and viable alternatives. This build has a ton of fun synergy, and when you combine it all, it's extremely powerful. If you like aggressive playstyles, then this build is absolutely for you. It centers around the exotic gauntlets point contact cannon brace, which have the armor perk Hammer of the God. Defeating targets with your thunderclap melee restores melee energy. Targets near you when you use your thunderclap suffer lightning strikes and become jolted. Being amplified increases the damage of these lightning strikes. So the melee returns you get are based on the tier of the combatant killed, and the lightning damage is increased by 50% when you're amplified, and you're amplified a lot with this build thanks to the aspect knockout. It states critically wounding a target or breaking their shield infuses your melee attacks with arc energy and increases your melee range and damage for a short time. Defeating targets with melee attacks makes you amplified and restores a portion of your health, and defeating more powerful combatants increases the amount of health restored. So the compendium data for knockout hasn't been updated, but in the patch notes with final shape, they buffed knockout to allow powered melee attacks to deal 50% more damage instead of 25%, and now it gives a chunk of health back instead of providing health regeneration. The chunk of health is determined off the tier of enemy that you kill, so this is extremely strong. Our Thunderclap melee already deals a lot of damage, and this just makes it hit even harder. Plus, it applies Jolt, and the lightning strikes that you make with point contact cannon brace will activate that Jolt, so it has tremendous ad clear. In my preview video, I was asked why not just run Insurmountable Skull Fort, and this is definitely a decent question to ask, and in lower end content, this would absolutely work. But in higher end content, you definitely want point contact cannon brace. In the Legend campaign, I was still having to play back sometimes and play smart, but when I was able to be in the fray, I always had a melee ready to take out enemies. Where with Skull Fort, you can just keep killing enemies over and over, but when you come across a tankier target, you might be screwed. Also with point contact, the lightning strikes would trigger the jolt, and this helps take out enemies that wouldn't have died otherwise. So the extra bit of jolt damage certainly helps in higher tier content, and the extra AoE you get with the lightning strikes and jolt is just, well, it's crazy. The ad clear this melee can do had me shocked. A number of times, enemies were getting tagged up and killed from very far away, and I just couldn't believe that a melee had that type of range. And speaking of how great Thunderclap is, it too got a buff. The patch notes are on screen now, but basically it just hits harder than it did before, and on top of that, you get damage resistance, which is really nice, as it allows you to stand in there and charge up your Thunderclap and not die. And with Prismatic, we can spam this over and over when we are Transcendent, and it hits even harder when we're Transcendent, which we will get to later. But back to the aspects, you definitely want Knockout for the survivability and damage increase, but the next aspect that I ran was Diamond Lance. Again, this was the starter version of this build, but even with all the aspects unlocked, I would still probably go with Diamond Lances, or maybe Dranger's Lash to suspend enemies. I use Thruster with this build, and it's really nice for quick movement to avoid enemy fire, and with Drangers, it would allow for very easy suspends. But Diamond Lances were extremely strong. Once again, I was really impressed by their ad clear. And they also came in super handy for freezing enemies like Tormentors too, so I could easily shoot their crit. And you'll be making a ton of lances with this build as they spawn from ability defeats. I often had multiple lances on the ground at once to pick up. For my grenade, I ran Pulse Grenade because they deal good damage, but you can run whatever you like for a grenade. Onto fragments, again, I use the starter fragments, so I will detail them and explain why they're good, but then I will go over some awesome alternatives to run once you get all the fragments unlocked. So first was Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you're more resistant to incoming damage, and while Transcendent, this effect is increased. This is super helpful for survivability when you're standing amongst enemies charging up your Thunderclap. It also gives us plus 10 to strength, which is great on this build. Next, we have Facet of Ruin, which increases the size and damage of the burst when you shatter a stasis crystal or frozen target. This was nice for the Diamond Lances, but once you get more fragments, I would take this one off. That being said, I did mention how I was impressed with the ad clear ability of Diamond Lances, and this was probably a big reason why it felt so good. Next is Facet of Dawn. Powered melee hits against targets make you radiant. Powered melee final blows make you and nearby allies radiant. So this does give us -10 to strength, but it's well worth it because obviously Radiant is very powerful as it's a free 25% weapon damage boost. So I definitely recommend running this, but if you don't care about free weapon damage, then feel free to take it off. But I loved having this as it allowed me to take out a bunch of adds with a Thunderclap and then pump damage into a higher tier enemy in the campaign. Next is Facet of Courage. Your light abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted with darkness debuffs, gives +10 to discipline. So this was really nice in Prismatic as our Prismatic grenade can suspend enemies, so then our melee would hit for even more damage. Additionally, if I ever froze enemies with a Diamond Lance, then my Thunderclap or Pulse Grenade would deal more damage. This would pair very nice with Dranger's Lash as you could just use your thruster to suspend enemies quickly and then lay into them with a Thunderclap for even more damage. Or if you ran a Shackle Grenade or Glacier Grenade. So run this if you like, but I don't think it's really mandatory as the Thunderclap on its own was dealing lots of damage. And finally, we have Facet of Purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Amplified, Resto, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super. I ran Blade Fury specifically so that I could get Woven Mail from picking up an Orb of Power. So this made us even tankier, and we were already tanky thanks to the numerous sources of damage resistance this build gives. So you can run what you like for a super, but Blade Fury goes super hard, and Woven Mail really helped me with survivability. So those were the fragments I ran, and believe me, they work amazingly with this build. I thought it would be a ton of fun, and it honestly exceeded my expectations for how strong I thought it would be. But now for other recommendations. Facet of Sacrifice says ability Final Blows grant bonus Darkness Transcendence if you have an Arc, Solar, or Void buff. Well, you are very often amplified and radiant with this build, and because you are thunderclapping so much, your light transcendence fills up very quickly. So this would just help you get darkness transcendence much quicker for getting thunderclap and pulse grenade kills. So it's very good if you want to build into transcendence. And being transcendent is extremely powerful with this build because the transcendent grenade is the best of the three classes in my opinion, allowing you to suspend and jolt targets, and then it also gives you quicker melee energy for more thunderclaps. So it's definitely a really strong fragment, and it gives +10 to discipline. One thing that I would definitely run is Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy. Rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. This is obviously all about our melee, so this would just give us even more melee energy returns, which is obviously very good. Facet of Awakening would allow us to make Ionic Traces when we get rapid defeats with our melee or pulse grenade, so this would be very strong as well, as that reduces our ability cooldowns even more, and it gives us +10 to resilience. Facet of Blessing gives you health regen on melee kills, but I didn't find I needed it much thanks to Knockout giving us a chunk of health. But I figured I'd mention it just in case you want to build into more survivability with this build. So that is about it for my other recommendations, and you can play around with different fragment combos to see what you like the best, and certain combinations will definitely be better for certain type of content as well. Onto the mods. On the helmet, I had Harmonic Siphon, which allowed my strand weapons to create orbs when I got multi-kills. I also had 2 strand weapons on in this build, so it worked really good. Then I had double hands on for lots of super energy for melee kills. On the gloves, I had 2 heavy-handed mods to give me stronger orbs of power and reduce the heavy-handed cooldown from 10 seconds to 5. And then I had Impact Induction, where causing damage with a powered melee attack reduces your grenade cooldown. But after playing with the build, I would actually take one heavy-handed off and run Momentum Transfer instead. This gives us melee energy when we deal damage with our grenade. So then both abilities would be feeding back into each other, and this would be even more potent when we're transcendent. On the chest piece, I just ran the Rainbow of Resist mods, so just run whatever is relevant to the activity that you're in. On the legs, I had Absolution to reduce all ability cooldowns when I picked up an Orb of Power, Invigoration for melee energy on orb pickup, and Recuperation for a chunk of health when I pick up an orb. And then on the class item, I had Bomber and Outreach for grenade and melee energy when I use my Thruster. This is great for quickly topping up your ability energy, and then Distribution for even more ability energy when I use my Thruster near enemies. Onto weapons, this is where I deviated the most from my preview build. I originally had Bastion on, but the melee increase to damage doesn't last long enough to work with a fully charged Thunderclap, so as soon as I unlocked the Call, which is a Strand Rocket sidearm, I threw that on and it didn't leave my side, unless a Tormentor came along, and then I would just quickly swap to a Kinetic Sniper like Succession. In the energy slot, I used Red Death. This build is great when you're in the fray and deleting everything with your melee, but I quickly found in the campaign that sometimes you have to sit back. Red Death feels great, and the cure it gives you is excellent. Again, this build has awesome health regen and damage resistance when surrounded by enemies, but at range, this healing came in super clutch. Plus, Pulse Rifle's got a massive buff, and it's an exotic primary, so it was shredding through ads. And finally, because I had Strand Siphon on the helm, I went with another strand weapon, the Godroll Cataphract GL3 with Envious Assassin and Bait and Switch. This was wonderful for chewing through high health enemies in the Legend campaign. The Rocket Sidearm was great for general play, and the Pulse was awesome on red bars from a distance. And with the GL, you could proc Bait and Switch, get a melee off for a 25% damage increase thanks to Radiant, and then deal massive damage with the grenade launcher. This loadout worked amazingly. Finally, we have artifact mods. I didn't have the whole suite of mods during my Legend campaign run, but now I have them unlocked, so I will share with you the best ones to run. I liked Anti-Barrier Pulse Rifle with Red Death. An Unstoppable Sidearm would stagger enemies on the call. Winning Hand allows our sidearm to deal some explosive solar damage. Elemental Siphon allowed me to make tangles with rapid final blows with my strand weapons, which actually happened pretty frequently. And Threaded Blast is niche, but would work well with this build in particular if you happen to shoot a tangle with your strand sidearm. Radiant Orbs is absolutely awesome. This build made lots of orbs with our melee from Heavy Handed as well as Strand Siphon, and then when we picked up an orb, it would give us 10 seconds of Radiant. This is a super strong mod and is probably going to be good on like every build this season. Galvanic Armor is a must run in my opinion. As mentioned, we're amplified a lot with this build, so then this gives us even more damage resistance. It's honestly crazy how tanky we are with this build when everything is rolling together. Onto the final column, I didn't play at all with these mods, but they will undoubtedly help the build. Shield Crush allows our melee to recharge faster when we have Woven Mail, which we have a decent amount thanks to Facet of Purpose. And then if we're Amplified or Radiant, which we are a lot with this build, our grenade will recharge more quickly as well. Again, I didn't have this unlocked when I was using the build, but this will just allow for even more frequent ability spam. And lastly, we have Transference. Gain increased grenade and melee damage while Transcendent. Weapon final blows while Transcendent refund light and dark energy after Transcendence ends. So you'll get even more damage from your Transcendent grenade and your melee, which are already very good. And then you can get weapon kills while Transcendent to get more energy back so that you can go Transcendent again. I can't stress this enough, but even at base this build was already amazing, and with these final two artifact mods, it's about to be even better. I seriously can't wait to play more with the perfected version of this build. I have not been able to stop playing Titan. This build is just too much fun. Anyways, that's going to do it for the video. I know there was a lot of info and things thrown at you, so I will provide a dim link down below, but it's very important to understand all the things that are working together and what makes it so strong. If this video was helpful, then a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Also, can we acknowledge how damn good the drip is on this build? I love strong builds that also look badass, and I seriously can't get enough of this one. It's exactly the reason I wanted to start a YouTube channel. I've been waiting for this exotic to be good for so long, and it has exceeded my expectations. This has quickly become one of my favorite builds in the entire game, and I'm sure you'll love it too. And definitely feel free to share this build with your friends, as I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Anyways, I'll stop talking now. I could go on forever how much I love this build, but I'll just say have fun clapping cheeks and take care.